Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We're powered by CLNS Radio. And today on the show, we have a CLNS sister podcast runner to talk about a little bit of NBA draft, a little bit of 76ers, a little bit of everything. He is the best writer in Philadelphia sports, in my opinion. It is Derek Bodner. Spike Eskin would kill me if I didn't refer to you as Godner at least once on this podcast. So there it is. But Derek, how's it going, man?
It's going well, thank you.
Yeah, he is. You have kind of created this. You haven't created it by any stretch, but you have. You're one of the people responsible for popularizing the idea of independent, totally independent sports journalism right now, and relying on a very loyal fan base and readership to basically supplement your work. And I respect everything that you were doing at the highest level, Derek, and I'm so excited that I get a chance to have you back on this show.
Well, thank you. It was, really, I think, a very unexpected way that this has gone about. I certainly, when I set it up, I think I said, within the first month, if I could have maybe 500 subscribers, I think that would have been a success. I would have considered that a success. And it's up over 1,800 at this point, and it completely blew away any reasonable expectations I have. I have no idea why it's happened, but I'm very grateful that it did, and hopefully I can keep it going.
Yeah. I mean, I'm certain that you will keep it going because you were awesome at doing everything, within basketball, really. I mean, you don't really do recruiting all that much, but you are someone like me who covers a little bit of college basketball through the sphere of the draft, and you cover the NBA at an extremely high level. So, I'm not too worried about you being successful, man.
Well, it's a crazy industry, and like I said, I'm very shocked that anybody actually was willing to subscribe. It's not necessarily a culture that we have in terms of content. I do hope it's something that changes in the future, and like I said, I'm just going to ride it as far as I can.
Yeah. The first thing that I want to talk to you about here is, before we get into NBA draft stuff, we're going to talk about the NBA draft a little bit through the sphere of Philadelphia, but more in general terms. But I do want to get a little bit of 76ers talk in at the top, because I do think that you have your kind of finger on the pulse better than anyone within the city there. The Nerlens Noel trade is something that I think I am higher on for Philadelphia than most people are. And I'm not saying it was like an awesome trade for the 76ers, but I don't think it's going to be a bad trade for them either. Where do you fall on the idea of giving up Nerlens Noel essentially for Justin Anderson and 2 second-round picks?
It could have been a first-round pick. It had that possibility.
We're not going to go first round pick. Yeah. We're not going to entertain the fake first round pick, even though that I don't know why they tried to sell that as a fake first round pick. That was the problem with all of it. I feel like.
Right.
They tried to pull one over on the fan base. I felt like, and
it was, I guess, for those not maybe as caught up on Sixers minutia as we are, it was a top 19 protected first round pick, and I think they had to jump 11 teams and make up something like 13 games in the last 27 or so to go. It was all not mathematically impossible, but there was no chance it was happening, and it was presented as a possible first round pick. It was
it was presented as a first round pick.
Yeah. It actually led to, I think in the press release they said, now it said Sixers acquire first round pick, Justin Anderson for Nerlens Noel. It was,
yes.
Yeah, the intent was clear, but it's a much smarter basketball public than I think maybe they expected. The trade, I think there's a couple things. First of all, I think there was this real divide in Philadelphia between Jahlil Okafor, Nerlens Noel, that debate. And I think a lot of people sided on Noel's side for that. I think they, if you came to the conclusion, basically the problem was Noel was going to be a free agent this summer, a restricted free agent. He clearly wasn't happy in a backup role. I understand all that. And I understand it. You don't want to make that kind of financial commitment to somebody who is, going to play backup minutes. And, maybe those backup minutes are a little more than a normal team because, Joel Embiid has so much uncertainty. You're going to treat him with kid gloves. I don't see a world where he plays more than 30 minutes a night anyway, because big men, especially 7'2", 275 big men, just don't do that. He's probably going to miss 10 to 12 games just on back-to-backs, on rest, on caution, on any time he, gets a hangnail. They're going to keep him out because they're so so vested in him staying healthy. So I think maybe there's a little more minutes available to the backup center spot than a normal team. And I think maybe the need for a backup center was maybe a little more than a normal team. But look, if Nerlens Noel's not going to be happy with that, it just doesn't matter. There's some people that just want to start. They want to be guaranteed that they're going to get their 30 minutes a night. They want to be guaranteed that they're going to be in at the end of the game. And if you can't offer that to him, he's not going to be happy. Then yeah, you do have to move him. I think my main problem with it was I think they expected the market to kind of improve towards the deadline, and I think they expected that his value would rise. And I think there's a very real case that the best offers they had were probably last offseason. And I think they came in basically he thought that he could hold out hope that his trade value was going to recoup. Obviously, the offers he was getting in the summer wasn't up to his liking. But, I'm not sure exactly how he thought that was going to play out. With 3 centers in Rashawn Holmes, you basically had to bet that not only was Noel going to play and stay healthy and play well, but also that he was going to be happy. If I was any team in the summer last year, I was calling that bluff because I just didn't see all of that happening. So Colangelo kind of tried to spin it that, he didn't feel like he was in a position to move any of the bigs last summer. That's nonsense. He clearly was. He was shopping, listening to anyone who would offer. But I just think he overplayed his hand. I don't think I don't think there was any way in which his value was going to go up when he was playing 13 minutes a night, unhappy about it. Changing backup roles with Holmes and Okafor and himself. It was just I didn't see how he was going to do himself well by holding on to him. And I think a team acquiring Noel, look, if you can get a guy a full season in your gym, see what he's made of, see what kind of teammate he is, see how he fits with the rest of your team, with your coaching staff, you're willing to give up more for a year of that, so you have more data when you go to resign him than you are of 2 months of that.
Yep.
So it just seemed like the best time to move him was last summer for everybody's sake, for his trade value's sake. And I just thought they overplayed their hand in keeping him and trying to recoup value that was probably never going to be there.
So I think that those are all awesome points, particularly the idea that if they knew at some point they were going to have to get rid of him because he wasn't happy, and maybe there was some misguided idea that they might be able to convince him to stay. It ultimately didn't work out like that, right? Like he does not want to play in a backup role, and they overplayed their hand there, and they overplayed their hand in turn in the trade market as well, thinking that they didn't have to trade him when they probably should have traded him, as you mentioned. What I will say about this entire thing is that people on the internet are a lot more excited about Nerlens Noel than people in the NBA. Don't you kind of get that impression? Because I know that you do talk to people around the league just like I do.
Sure, a little bit. And I think a lot of it's maturity concerns. I think there's some very real question marks about that. And I think that's fair, to be honest. He's not, he had his incidents here in Philadelphia as well. I'm pretty willing myself to take gambles on guys with his kind of athletic and defensive potential. But no, I think there was more concern league-wide. And I think a lot of that is maturity. And clearly it's just, there's such a glut at the position that any real ding against you in that regard,
right,
there's going to be options to look elsewhere. But,
right. It's definitely maturity is the question mark, right? Like, is he ever going to reach his full potential just due to the maturity concerns? And do you really want to pay a guy potentially $75 to $80 million this offseason that has maturity concerns? And Philadelphia ultimately decided that was not worthwhile, especially in a market which, as you mentioned, is flush with big men right now. Like, basically what's happening here is, and this is something that I keep mentioning in economic terms, right? So the supply of big men in the NBA is staying the same, but the demand for big men is going down as we continue to downsize in today's NBA, right? Guys like Nerlens Noel, they're valuable. His particular skill set is very valuable. If you look at what Thon Maker's been able to do for Milwaukee, there's a lot of excitement about him right now, and for good reason. Nerlens is kind of a better version of that even, because he's even a little bit more laterally quick and has even better defensive instincts. The problem with all of this is do you really want to, take that kind of risk on a big man that also has injury concerns? Like, we need to full on say that, like, his knees and lower body and everything like that, like, there are major question marks there. So I understand from Philadelphia's perspective why they did not want to pay Nerlens Noel. I also think that they did a little bit better in this trade than people think. I'm someone that's been high on Justin Anderson throughout basically his entire career. I think that He is exactly what teams are striving to find in the NBA right now. 6'6" guys who can play the 3 and 4 and credibly defend the 3 and 4, that have 7-foot wingspans, that are strong, that can, maybe potentially one day shoot the 3. I don't know if he's ever going to, but, it's in the cards that he could one day get to that level. And, he has a little bit better ball skills in terms of slashing to the rim than I think we saw in Dallas, and we saw it a little bit late with Philadelphia. He was able to score going to the rim a little bit better than what I had seen in the past in his NBA career. And I'm just kind of more in on him than I think a lot of people are, maybe. Maybe that's misguided on my part, but you get him, you get another top 40 selection from Dallas. They're going to get number 39 in this year's draft from them, which is a very valuable pick. It will probably result in another guaranteed contract player for Philadelphia. I like the value that they got, basically. I think that almost any time that you can swap big for wing, unless it's a massive, massive difference, and I think you can make the argument that there's a pretty big difference in terms of Justin Anderson to Nerlens Noel. But, I think that ultimately there is intrinsic value in swapping big for wing in today's NBA.
Yeah. There's a shortage of real wings that can play and defend multiple positions, and like you said, there's a huge glut in centers, and that is certainly a big factor in value and trade value. I don't disagree with you entirely on Justin Anderson. I think that shot is a very, very important skill, and that translating. He didn't shoot the ball well his first 2 years at Virginia. He had an incredible junior season, and since he's come to the NBA, it's kind of reverted back.
Well, it's really since he broke his finger at Virginia.
Sure. Towards the end of the season. It's if that comes around, then he has a very, very clearly defined role, a role that a lot of people would look for in the NBA. I do agree with you. He has some value slashing. Clearly, he has value defensively. It's just, that shot's very important, especially on a Sixers team where, the offense is going to be built around Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. Yep. Having a non-shooter on the wings is going to be very difficult to navigate. So, I think it's a reasonable risk to take. I don't certainly don't slot him in as a starter or even a rotation piece for the long term. But if you want to give him he's got 2 more years on his rookie deal. If you want to see if he can make that jump shot a consistent part of his game, like I said, I think it's a reasonable gamble to take. For me, it's never really been about Justin Anderson. It's just more whether or not it was the whole situation was handled. You ended up selling kind of low on Noel. Colangelo claimed that he turned down more substantial offers for Okafor than he received for Noel. Now, whether or not you believe that or not, it's tough to do so. But now you look at Okafor, is his value going to go up? And are you going to sell at the nadir of his value as well? And I think that's kind of where the focus has been for the Sixers. Ultimately, long term, if Joel Embiid works out, none of this really matters. Richaun Holmes is certainly a more than capable backup for Embiid if he's healthy. But just from an asset management perspective, I think a lot of people are a little down on how that was handled.
Yeah, I agree with you there. The assets were not managed properly. And again, we can't emphasize enough the public relations decisions that went into this trade were not very strong, and they were not handled well at all in terms of basically lying to the fans. That's what happened here. Right. Philadelphia lied to the fans in this scenario.
Wasn't the first time this year.
Yeah, that's very true, given the fact that no one knew how injured Joel Embiid was whenever he was essentially out for the season at that stage.
Yeah, he was day-to-day for a solid month. Anyway, moving on.
Unbelievable. Let's move on to the NBA draft. Derek, who is your favorite prospect in the NBA draft? Are you, like many people, on the Markelle Fultz bandwagon?
Yeah, it's kind of boring at this point.
I think it is, too, to be honest. I think it's very clear.
Yeah, no, I think it's clear, and I think a lot of people are at that same spot, and it's boring taking the consensus guy, but yes, he is my favorite prospect in this draft.
What do you like about him particularly?
Just the diversity of his scoring. There's, I wrote about this recently, but I feel like we get so into measurements, specifically combine measurements, wingspan and vertical and all that stuff, and that's all important, but I think a big reason why we're into that is because it's so easily measurable. We can run our, predictive tools against it. But I think what he has is something we don't measure very well, and that's, balance and coordination and body control. And he has that in such droves that he is just the most diversified offensive player in this draft, I think. And I think you put him in an NBA offense, pick and roll, the kind of spacing the NBA has, and a couple of real viable weapons around him. I think he's going to be a very hard guard in the NBA. Now, whether or not he's going to get there defensively, I think he has a lot of tools to do so. I don't think he showed necessarily the real desire or the focus to do so clearly. But when you give me a point guard with that kind of skills that fits so perfectly in today's NBA, I just think it's a pretty easy selection at the top.
Yeah, what you just said about the fluidity and the body control and the coordination, those are all points that I've been trying to nail down to our listenership here at the Game Theory Podcast, and I'm so glad that you pointed them out from a second side, because they are just such innate skills for him that every time that he goes into the air, it's like he's a floater more than a explosive like a time bomb waiting to go off almost, right?
Yeah, exactly.
He's so capable of hanging in the air. His hand-eye coordination is unbelievable. His vision at the rim, whenever he sees limbs and arms and can float around them and kind of finish beside their arms, it's unbelievable. In one underrated aspect of his game that kind of goes into this fluidity, body control, things that are difficult to measure. He's unbelievable in the pick and roll, getting guys on his back, keeping guys on his hip, kind of getting that little bit of space for a little push shot or a floater shot in the 12 to 8 foot range. He can knock down mid-range jumpers. He can knock down shots off of the pick and roll, behind the 3-point line. He's just such a capable scorer in so many ways. And I think that calling him a scorer almost underrates him in a way, because he's also an unbelievable passer. I mean, you look at what he was able to do. He averaged 6 assists a game this year on a team that essentially had no other 3-point shooters beyond him. They shot 30.8 or 31% or so as a team if you take away Markelle Fultz's 3-point attempts this year. So he had no floor spacing. He had not a ton of talent next to him. I mean, Noah Dickerson's probably a high major player, and Matisse Thybulle's a high major player, but I don't know that there are any other for sure high major players on that team. And he was just so capable of making it work for him, even in a setting that was not ideal.
Yeah, and it would be interesting. And look, Lonzo Ball's court vision is otherworldly compared to Markelle Fultz. For as great as a passer as Fultz is, Ball's at a different level, but it would have been interesting to flip their roles, put Fultz on UCLA and see, what his final stats would have looked like, see what the win total would have looked like, because you were dead on. That team was dreadful, and it was really tough to watch. It was really interesting. I was actually at a game towards the end of the season, a Sixers game, when Markelle Fultz was in the crowd. He was in the first row. And I'm just sitting there watching, because at that point, there's not a whole lot to cover with the Sixers. And I'm just sitting there watching people walk up, sit next to him, walk around him, and nobody recognized him. And it was funny because, first of all, these were diehard Sixers fans, guys if you're buying courtside tickets to watch the Sixers and wearing a Joel Embiid jersey, you're a pretty diehard fan. You would expect to know who, the guy that you're chasing in the draft is, and nobody recognized him. And it's, for a guy who's almost consensus number one, to be under the radar like he has, to play no national TV games, not play in any tournaments, it's kind of fun to watch in that regard. But they were just such a train wreck, and it was so painful to watch, even for diehard fans. And it really didn't fit him at all. And you're right, for him to come out and average 23, 6, and 6, it was really quite remarkable.
Yeah. To me, what do you think his ceiling is? I'll ask you first. What do you believe Markelle Fultz's ceiling is? To me, I think he can be a top 5 offensive player in the entire NBA. Do you go that far with him? Do you believe that could eventually happen? And I'm not saying will happen. I'm saying, if everything breaks right for Markelle Fultz, do you think that could actually happen?
Right, and could and will are certainly very different statements.
Right.
And top 5 offensive player compared to top 5 player is also a different statement.
Absolutely.
No, look, I think you could see him averaging 23, 25, 27 points per game. I don't think that's out of the cards. I think he's that skilled. I think you put the right people around him in the right system. I think he has that kind of offensive upside, definitely.
Yeah, he's just so innately talented in a way, and he has everything that you're looking for. He is the complete game on offense. He doesn't have a defensive game. I mean, do we want to talk about the defense, or do we just want to move on? Like, I don't know that there's even really a whole lot to talk about beyond he didn't try on defense this year.
Right.
The team was a disaster on defense in transition, in half court, in every setting, and it just was not a great spot for him, basically.
No, and you're hoping you can get him to buy in, because he does have, a 6'9", 6'10" wingspan. He has some physical tools. He's a little thick. He can defend a little bit in terms of guys bigger than him, but he has to care and he has to be focused. And he wasn't that. He wasn't in a stance almost at all last year.
Yep.
And you hope you can get through him. You hope it was a situational thing. But yeah, his defense was, for as good as his offense was, you do have to bring up his defense, and you do hope that ultimately those physical tools eventually at least make him productive on that end, even if not consistent.
Yep. Let's move on to the player that a lot of people have at number 2 that I don't. Lonzo Ball, if we're going to talk about Markelle Fultz being a complete offensive player, Lonzo Ball is a player that has, dizzyingly high basketball IQ and vision and, some of the other skills that go into basketball. But he also has, incredibly unique and, incredibly unique is you don't really qualify the word unique, but he has very real holes in his game that, even the layman can point to, right? So how do you kind of, figure out how to make Lonzo Ball work in the NBA, and where do you personally have him rated on your quote unquote board?
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I probably have him 3rd. I probably jump Josh Jackson up above him on my team agnostic big board. And I think there's a lot, I think Lonzo Ball, for as talented as he is and as good of a prospect as he is, I think a lot of it's going to come down to situation for him. I think he has to be in the right spot. Whereas Markelle Fultz, you can pretty much drag and drop him onto any team in the league, and he would fit. Lonzo Ball is, he's going to have a high-level initiator on the perimeter with him. He really showed his struggles creating in the half court. He really showed his struggles defending. The screen and roll, he struggles terribly defending the screen and roll. He gets bulldozed by him. He's not the quickest laterally. He showed that against Kentucky. He has some very significant holes in his game, but by the same token, he can shoot off the catch. He can cut off the ball. He has some also unique skills in terms of what you wouldn't expect for a point guard. I really think he would thrive well in an almost 2-point guard lineup. Maybe not 2-point guard, but like I said, a high-level initiator on a perimeter with him, because he does have those off-the-ball skills.
Well, and that's what UCLA did this year, too. They played him often with Aaron Holiday. Yeah.
Yep. He's fascinating because you almost, for as talented as he is passing the ball, you usually don't say, hey, let's put another point guard with him. Like you would typically want to put him in as many shot creation situations as you could, but because of his unique off-ball skills, I think he could thrive in that role. And luckily, a lot of the teams at the top do have a lot of guard play with them, which should help. Which should help him early on in his career. His defense is going to need a lot of work. He's going to need to be in the right role offensively. But I do like, I am a little comforted by his shot, even though I still cringe every time he takes it. Mm-hmm. But he made enough of them at an NBA distance and consistently enough that, at least that's a projectable skill, and I think that's going to be important.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. When you look at teams at the top, I think he would be fine on Boston. I have questions on Phoenix because I think they would try and play him long-term with Devin Booker. Los Angeles, I think, would be awesome on offense, questionable on defense if they end up keeping their pick or transferring it to Philadelphia. The Sixers, what do you think about the Sixers with him? Because you could theoretically play him with an awesome initiator like Ben Simmons, and that could kind of work really well to me.
Yeah, no, I think the Sixers, when I mentioned he'd be 3rd on my team agnostic, I would bump him up to 2nd for the Sixers. And I think him and Simmons would be really fascinating in the half court. Because clearly both of them can grab a rebound, push the ball, and transition at an elite level. That would really help, especially when you have a guy like Embiid to block shots, force turnovers, get rebounds, and ignite the break. But in the half court, I kind of dream right now of a Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid pick and roll. And you need a real secondary playmaker outside of that, so that if a double team comes, he can make him pay. And I think one of the things that Lonzo Ball has, besides the fact that he can spot up and shoot, he's also a quick decision maker. The ball's not going to stop with him. He can make reads and decisions on the fly and get that ball to where it needs to go. And if somebody double teams Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid pick and roll, kicks it out the ball, now you've got the defense in a rotation. And I think he can really pick them apart in that regard. So I think he would fit in well with the Sixers. I do think defense is going to be a concern anywhere he goes, but at least the Sixers have size and length, and at the very least, even though Ben Simmons kind of suffers from a lot of the same afflictions in terms of defense, at the very least, Ball and Simmons can force turnovers and ignite the break, which helps both of their offensive games. I think it would be an interesting fit. His jump shot would become a very big factor that really needs to translate if he's going to be on the Sixers. But I think there's reason to believe that, kind of those two, Ball and Simmons, handling the half court offense would work out well.
Yeah, and I mean, you could even theoretically play them next to a smaller guard that can really score, and let that smaller guard the point guard. Like, theoretically, like, you could maybe draft a Malik Monk if they end up with the Lakers pick as well. And that can be your backcourt of the future, with Ben Simmons initiating offense, playing off of Lonzo Ball. And, everything comes together in Philadelphia, and Sam Hinkie looks like a genius. And Brian Colangelo gets credit for it from the main fans. Yep. But I just look at how special he is, and you mentioned it in terms of making decisions. And the ball never, ever sticks with him. And that is a really important skill as we continue to move into this NBA that does run its share of pick and roll variations with double screens, or little dribble handoffs or things at the top of the key. But it's also really important for guys that might play a little bit more off ball to be really quick decision makers, to either move the ball or to knock down shots from the catch. And he has shown that he can really knock down shots from the catch. You mentioned Josh Jackson. Josh Jackson is a guy that I worry about with the 76ers because of the lack of shooting ability. Where are you at with him overall, and particularly with the Sixers?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a very real. I mean, what did he end up shooting at the end of the year? Like 38% from three? That is the least confident I've ever been in a 38% three-point shooter. Yep. Between the free throw percentage, which was high 50s, something in that range, the low sample size, his high school career, the form on it, which is very inconsistent. I don't have a lot of confidence in that jump shot. I think he benefited greatly by playing mostly at the 4 spot. And there's, I've read a lot of concern of whether or not he can be, first of all, an elite defender, and second of all, a really primary initiator on the wings. I think both of those are fair concerns. But similar to Ball, I like how well-rounded he is, and how good of a decision maker he can become. And I think there's still some work he needs to do in that regard, but I think he clearly has that capability in him. Just a well-rounded wing. Not the easiest to get out there, but who can defend, who can make good decisions with the ball, who can create for others, who can rebound, push in transition. I mean, I think he brings a lot to the table, and I think that kind of guy is difficult to get. But I do think if you're going to draft him to be your kind of primary perimeter initiator, or maybe your shutdown forward defender, I think there might be a little bit of concern there. But I still think he does enough in his all-around game to be, a top 3 or 4 prospect in this draft pretty easily.
Out of the players that are kind of in that, and I want to throw Jason Tatum in here too. Jason Tatum, to me, is the number 2 overall prospect in this draft. I know a lot of people are a little bit lower on him. I would imagine, actually, I don't know what your thoughts are on Jason Tatum. You tend to have, typically I can judge by like the draft evaluator what they will think of Jason Tatum, but with you, I actually don't know.
He would probably be in that. I would say, he's in that 4 to 6 range for me. Like, I don't think I'm anti-Jason Tatum. I don't think I'm his biggest fan. I think I'm probably right in the middle somewhere. Mm-hmm. I think he clearly has a very high skill level. I think his defensive versatility surprised me, probably exceeded my expectations quite a bit. I can certainly see him adding some weight down the line and playing some 4 minutes. I do have a little bit of concern on the jump shot translating to the NBA level. I do have a little bit of concern about how easy it was to get him to settle for maybe those mid-range shots or floaters. I would like to see him get to the rim a little bit more, but I think he does enough. Yeah, and even passing the ball, I think he exceeded my expectations. I think, I think he's similar to Jackson, I think he has a pretty well-rounded all-around game, and I'm not sure. I think my biggest concern with Tatum, is if he can't create at a level to be, a number one, a number two type option, does he then have the willingness to slide back, be more of a tertiary playmaker? Does he have the shot that is going to be consistent enough to really thrive in that role? I think there's some concern there, but I'm willing to overlook quite a bit of that. If I think, first of all, I think he's got offensive talent to be more than that, but second of all, even if not, I think he has defensive versatility that he's going to be a good pro almost regardless. So I think I'm kind of in the middle on Tatum.
Mm-hmm. Out of the guys that are below like that kind of level of elite prospect, what guy do you think is being underrated right now?
I like Isaac a lot. I like Jonathan Isaac a lot. Mm-hmm. And, I think when you're talking about defensive versatility, I think he might be one of the most versatile defenders in the draft.
Yep.
I think, especially if he's able to add some weight, and I think that's a pretty legitimate concern. But the way that he is able to impact the game in so many different ways, from rebounding to switching positions. I mean, they switched a lot at Florida State, and he did that very successfully. Altering shots at the rim, even closing out, I think he does that fairly well under control. I think there's a lot to like about him defensively. And I think he has some tools and some talent offensively. I think my biggest question with Jonathan Isaac is he almost too willing to accept that role? Is he maybe not quite confident in his own game to make the most of his natural talent? But I think, like I said, I like defensive versatility in my forward spots. I think Jonathan Isaac has that in spades. And I'm willing to, even if he's only ends up being a third or fourth option offensively, I think he's going to be a very good basketball player, and I do think he has talent to grow a little bit more than that. I also like Fox, and I didn't always like Fox. And the first half of the year, non-shooting point guards concern me quite a bit. And I'm not sure I'm 100% ready to buy his shooting towards the end of the season. But he did such a better job of getting into the paint, getting to the rim, and getting a line at the end of the season that you factor in all of those improvements, and I'm much more willing to buy in on Fox than I was in December.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely a big fan of Jonathan Isaac, as I've written recently at Vice, and I can't remember if I've podcasted since then, but I think that Jonathan Isaac might have the most defensive potential of any player in this draft. The more that I watch him, the more impressed I am with how quick his feet are, in conjunction with how good he is at protecting the weak side of the rim, as well as just having very disruptive hands. He always has his hands up. He's very good at getting into passing lanes. And one note that I had in my Jonathan Isaac write-up was he is the fifth player since 2009 to have, I want to say it is, a 25 defensive rebounding rate, a 6% block rate, and a 2.5% steal rate. The other four guys, one of them's Eric Murray, who got himself kicked out of two schools, one of which was LaSalle, one of which was West Virginia in 3 years. The other three are Anthony Davis, two-time All-Defensive Team member, Andre Robertson, who will be an All-Defensive Team member this year, in my opinion, and Dwayne Dedmon, who has turned himself into a starter on the Spurs, who were the best defensive team in the NBA this year. So I really like the statistical indicators. I really like what I see on tape. And I really think that in a lot of ways, all of that kind of works together to create this. It's a safety net for his game, to where I kind of consider him to be a lot safer of a prospect than what you would think of from the profile of skinny, tall, developing offensive game, big man,
Yep. No, I'm right there with you. I like him quite a bit. I think if a team gets him in the 6 to 9 range, I think they got themselves quite a find. I also, like I said, I tend to value those types of athletic forwards and versatile forwards quite a bit.
Well, how do you think he would fit on the Sixers? Do you think that it could work playing him next to Ben Simmons in the front court?
If that shot that shot, every time I talk about the Sixers, it's going to come back to that shot. And if that shot is he can extend that out to the NBA, then yes, I think it could work. The question starts becoming, though, not only do you have Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, but then you have Dario Saric and Robert Covington.
Right.
And I know I was on this podcast and talked about Robert Covington when he was probably shooting about 30% from the field and almost unplayable offensively, but we talked about his defense. And that maintained throughout the year. And when I'm looking at a core with Embiid and Covington as your, kind of your primary defenders, Embiid weak side, team defense, Covington on the opponent's best offensive player, that's a good base to start with, and giving that up would be difficult. But by the same token, we just talked about how much defensive upside Jonathan Isaac has. So I think he could fit. I think the shooting off the ball is going to be a very big key. But if you have him and Embiid and Covington and Simmons in some kind of rotation, that to me is a very good base to start off on the defensive side of the court.
Well, yeah, I mean, you would almost use Isaac as you could use him as like Dario Saric cover off of the bench, right? Like you could, because I always see Dario for the 76ers at least as their primary, initiator off of the bench, right? Like he's going to be an awesome sixth man in the NBA, and you could kind of use Jonathan Isaac to hide him a little bit, and then you could use him as insurance in case Robert Covington leaves in unrestricted free agency, which I don't think the Sixers handled that well whenever his option came up last offseason. I think they probably should have declined it and let him become a restricted free agent. That way you could have held on to his rights a little bit longer. But now that that's done, he is going to be an unrestricted free agent after next season. And, I guess that it would be nice to have some cover for that,
Well, he actually would have been an unrestricted free agent after this season, too, because he had a 6-game stint.
Last season. After last season's.
I thought you meant after this year. He had that 6-game stint or whatever with Houston that screwed that up. Yep. It's interesting, though, because they have, it used to be you could start renegotiating guys after the third anniversary of their contract, and now it's after the second. So they can theoretically start renegotiating his contract on, I guess it would be July 1st. Mm-hmm. So you wonder how much for priority they're gonna make that, considering how much cap space they have and how they can roll that in that final year. It will it'll be interesting how they handle that. He is going from $1 million contract to a much bigger contract, so you always get to a point with some of these wings, and especially after last offseason where a lot got real silly money. You wonder what his next contract is going to be. But yeah, it could be a little insurance, and if not, you have one of the stronger defensive front courts, at least in terms of potential and youth, that you could then grow with. It'd be probably easier to take Isaac if you did get 2 draft picks, if you got the Lakers pick to convey as well. Yeah. And you could get some kind of perimeter scoring with that other pick. But certainly he's a guy that I wouldn't cross off the board just because you have a glut at the forward spot.
Absolutely. What guys do you think have been a little bit underrated so far in this draft process?
I think Frank Ntilikina is an interesting case because he did change his role so much, and I think he showed. I mean, the jump he made in terms of shooting the basketball was so important for his game. Yeah. That I'm kind of surprised that he fell the way he has, or at least seemingly has fallen the way he has. And part of that's because his point guard class is just so strong. There's so many other options, but his defensive profile is so unique, and he's shown that he can make shots. That I don't know exactly where he should be because, like I said, this class is so strong in that regard. But in terms of if he's a late lottery type selection, I think there's a lot there. I think Terrence Ferguson is the most interesting case. I'm not sure exactly what to make of him. I certainly wouldn't say he's underrated, but I think the route that he went in going to Australia and receiving so little playing time, but then having the kind of physical attributes that he has and defensive upside is interesting. It's hard to take a guy, who showed so little. But if he can, I think he shot low 30s in terms of his shot. If he can get that up to mid to high 30s, and he's got a real role in the league too. I would have said Luke Kennard, but I think at this point he's probably properly rated. I think for much of the season he was probably underrated, but I think he's I think he's gone up appropriately. I think Isaiah Hartenstein is kind of interesting as a prospect, and he's so inconsistent. Every time I watch him, he'll go from. He looks like he has a lot of, like he'll communicate real well defensively. He'll make the right rotation, and you'll say, man, he's really got something that he can then give you. And then the next 3 trips down the court, he'll miss a rotation and kind of seemingly blame his teammates. And the consistency is just not there. But his passing, I think I like quite a bit. Like I said, I think at times he shows the ability to be a team defender, and he competes on the glass. And I think he's a guy, if we're talking mid to late 20s, I think he's a guy I kind of like. And I'm not 100% bought in on because I don't 100% trust him. But in that range, I think he's a willing gamble.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point on Hartenstein. He's so skilled. This is something I talked with Danny LaRue about on the Real GM radio podcast. Also on the CLNS radio network. We talked about the fact that we're not sure that he's ever going to be a starting big man in the NBA. But at that level, it doesn't really matter. Like, it's very rare for you to find a legitimate starting caliber player at the number 23 or number 21 or number 27 range in the NBA draft.
Sure.
And the reasons are we're just not sure what he's going to do defensively, right? Like, he's not going to be a crazy rim protector. His athleticism, what do you think of his athleticism? Because every time I talk to people, either around the league or, people like you and I who do NBA draft coverage, I get differing thoughts. I personally think that he is an average athlete. Like, I don't think he is this awesome athlete by any stretch. Like, a lot of people are very impressed by how, athletic he shows himself for, like, a European big man. But,
well, he was also born in, he's a really weird, what did he move over there when he was like 10, I think?
Yeah, that's a really good point too, because he was born in like the United States in Oregon, right?
His father's a coach. I think he went over there, moved his family over there to coach.
Yeah, no. So, like, it's a really weird case for sure with Hartenstein. And I want to like a lot of his game, but I'm definitely more comfortable with him now in the 20s range. Jared Allen is a guy that I like the skill set. You talk to people around the league, there are some concerns in terms of how much he enjoys the game of basketball and what his trajectory is going to be like improving at that level. So we'll see whether or not teams get enthused about him. But from what I saw on the floor this year, he looked to really be enjoying Texas in Big 12 play when he was averaging like 16 points, 10 rebounds, and 2 blocks a game.
Yeah. No, I like him as well. Like you said, if that, I think he projects pretty well as a shot blocker, and I think that's important. And I think I would like to see that jumper come on a little stronger. I'm not entirely sure what to make of it. I think he shot mid-50s from the free throw line, so I'm not entirely bought on that. And that's a pretty key skill, especially for a guy who I don't think he's going to be a major pick and dive type threat. I'd like to find a more defined offensive role for him. Mm-hmm. But no, I certainly like him in that range quite a bit as well.
Yeah, the Sixers have what we think 4 second-round picks. Is that right?
yeah, something around there.
Are there any second-round guys that you're really looking at, thinking that Philly could do a nice job by taking them?
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting class because there are a lot of guys who were rated pretty highly at one point, guys like Nigel Hayes specifically, guys who would have gone higher if they'd come out earlier, and you wonder whether or not Thomas Bryant, another case, not that you would include him for the Sixers because they're trying to solve their glut as is. Juwan Evans, I think if he falls the second round, I probably think he doesn't, but if he does, I think he's a guy that could fit a little bit for the Sixers. Sindarius Thornwell, I like quite a bit for them, actually, for what they need and what he has grown into and the jump that he made during his senior season. I think he would fit. There's, a couple other guys. Josh Hart would be very popular because of a local pick. There's I think at that point, one of the tough things with the Sixers is because you have so much front court depth. It's one thing for us to talk about Jonathan Isaac and say, he's good enough that you take even with that front court depth. But a guy in the second round, if he doesn't get an opportunity, then it almost doesn't matter what his talent level is. So maybe you reach for some of these perimeter players, and I think that's why I'm looking through a list, and I'm talking about guys like Thornwell, talking about guys like Hart, more perimeter-focused guys who would have a role or at least a chance to show that they belong, because for a team like the Sixers who has really had been kind of one big tryout session for some of these second-round picks and or undrafted guys over the years, that's not really going to be the case anymore. So the position and the skill sets become much more important.
Yeah, no, the guys that I really like for them are, I like the idea of a Monte Morris in case, TJ McConnell ends up leaving at some point. Like, he just kind of overprices himself in the market. Because I don't know that TJ is a guy that the Sixers are going to want to pay like $8 million a year to. Like, they're probably not going to want to use their mid-level exception on him, right?
Isn't that amazing that we're having this conversation now?
I know, it's awesome. I love it. Trust me. But like at the same time, we have to be realistic about it too.
Sure.
Sure. Josh Hart, I think, would be a smart pick. I like Monte Morris. Was where I was going to go with this. Monte Morris is just kind of the prototypical backup point guard for today's NBA to me. I like a guy like Wesley Iwundu for them, kind of another big guy who played a little bit of point guard this year, could maybe be like a secondary initiator for them at 6'7" with a 7-foot wingspan. Another secondary initiator. Derek White is a guy that was one of the best players in college basketball this year that went totally under the radar, averaged 18 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists a game, shot, I want to say, like 40% from three, tested reasonably well at Portsmouth in kind of weird ways. I don't know that he's going to defend all that well, but he's a really interesting prospect. Edmund Sumner might be an interesting two-way contract guy for them. Super athletic, big point guard that, again, could be a secondary initiator next to a Ben Simmons. LJ Peak could be like a 3-and-D kind of wing guy that I like for them. There are a lot of options for the 76ers, it feels like, and for a lot of teams, really, in this NBA draft. If you're looking for, these higher upside, maybe blank canvasy kind of players that can kind of develop into their roles in the D League and get paid a good amount of money to do it now with two-way contracts.
Yeah. No, and I mean, the nice thing about, if you're a Sixers fan, about the second round and having four picks, and I think it's very unlikely to end up having 4 picks at the end of the day, but there is a lot of perimeter talent out there with those spots. I like your suggestions of Morris and White. I think one of the things I like about Morris is that he's been pretty consistent in terms of his three-point shooting over the years. I brought up Thornwell, and he went from, I think, 33% to like 38 or 39% his last year.
Yep.
A lot of times that's a little questionable whether or not that is a legitimate improvement that's going to translate out to the NBA three-point line. But Morris, I mean, he's been shooting 38, 39, 40% pretty much his entire career at Iowa State. I like that suggestion. I like White. I like where you're going with those.
Yeah. Derek, is there anything else you want to talk about before I let you go, man?
That's an open-ended question. No, I think I'm pretty much okay. I think this is it's a really interesting top of the draft. I really enjoy this class quite a bit, and I think a lot of times at this time of year, I'm pretty much over it and ready to move on to the next year's class. But I think this one has kept my attention, and I think there's so many different options at the top. Like if you're a team in need of a point guard, this is a great class to debate, because there's so many different options. They all do it a very different way, and I think that makes for great debates. And it's a strong class. I don't know if it's quite has the star power a lot of people thought at the beginning of the year. I think that's also pretty typical of the NBA draft. In November you love everybody, and in May all you can think of is their flaws. But it's fun times.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Derek, please tell the people where they can find your work, where they can subscribe to your work, and find your podcast and everything like that.
Yeah, well, DerekBodner.com is the subscription. Sixers focus, or if you're not a Sixers fan, probably not worth the $3. Even if you are, I'm not sure it's worth the $3, but subscribe anyway. And also, some stuff for Draft Express and The Ringer. Probably easiest just to follow me on Twitter at Derek Bodner NBA.
Derek does a great job. Like I said, I would suggest everyone to follow him. The 76ers are going to be a really important team, not only over the course of the next 2 months, but over the course of the next few years here as they continue to, have Joel Embiid and have Ben Simmons and have those guys develop within their system. So I would shoot Derek a follow if I was you guys. And this has been the Game Theory Podcast. You can follow me at Sam_Vicini on Twitter. We're powered by CLNS Radio, where you can find shows like Derek's Sixers Beat. You can find Real GM Radio by Danny LaRue. You can find a wide breadth of shows that are breaking down the NBA playoffs right now as they continue to go on. Please remember, though, to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. It really does help us move up and down in the ratings on iTunes, and it's just really beneficial to us as a show. Keep it locked here. We'll be back on Thursday with another episode of the Game Theory Podcast. But until next time, we'll talk soon.